I have often been told that memory is a jealous storyteller. It keeps what burns brightest and lets the rest fade. When I look back on the season that changed my life, I see it not as a straight line, but as a constellation of moments, glances, silences, confessions, each glowing with its own intensity. This is my story, told from the place where it began, inside my own heart. I was raised to believe that independence was a form of dignity. My mother used to say that a woman should learn the shape of her own strength before she ever leans into another's. I carried that lesson with me into adulthood, into my work, my friendships, even into the way I walked through a room. People often commented on my appearance, on the curve of my waist, the confidence in my posture. But what they couldn't see was the careful architecture of self-respect holding me upright. I had learned to be admired without being claimed. When I first heard his name, it arrived wrapped in rumor. He was wealthy, they said, born into a world of glass towers and old money, where last names carried weight and doors opened before you reached them. He owned companies, art, silence. Some spoke of him with awe, others with resentment, but everyone spoke as if he were untouchable. I listened with polite distance. Wealth had never impressed me. It was character that caught my attention. We met at a charity gala overlooking the river, the city lit like a necklace around its dark throat. I remember the dress I wore, not because it was expensive or dramatic, but because it felt like a second skin, honest and unafraid. When I turned, I felt his gaze before I saw him. There is a particular gravity in being truly seen, and that was what startled me most. His eyes did not skim, they lingered, curious rather than consuming. He introduced himself simply, without titles. His voice was calm, measured, as if he had learned long ago the power of restraint. We spoke first of unimportant things, the music drifting through the hall, the view, the cause that had brought us there. But beneath the small talk ran an undercurrent of recognition. I sensed that he too was accustomed to being misunderstood, reduced to a symbol rather than known as a person. As the evening unfolded, we found ourselves drawn into longer conversation. He asked about my work, and when I answered, he listened, not waiting for his turn to speak, not distracted by the room. That attention felt like a gift. In return, I asked him what he loved beyond numbers and negotiations. He paused, then smiled with something like relief. Building things that last, he said, and learning when to let them go. I went home that night with his words echoing in me. I told myself not to romanticize a stranger, not to confuse chemistry with destiny. Yet, in the quiet of my apartments, I felt a warmth that refused to be dismissed. It was not desire alone, though desire was there, humming softly. It was the sense that a door had opened to a room I had not known existed. Our next meeting was unplanned, which somehow made it feel inevitable. We crossed paths at a small bookstore weeks later, both reaching for the same novel. I laughed at the coincidence, and he looked at me as if the universe had finally spoken plainly. We spent the afternoon among shelves, trading favorite passages, discovering overlaps in taste that felt less like chance and more like alignment. From there, our connection grew with a steady intensity. We did not rush. Passion, I learned, does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it deepens in the spaces between words. We walked through parks, shared meals that stretched into hours, argued gently about art and ethics. Each encounter peeled back another layer, revealing vulnerability beneath polish, sincerity beneath privilege. I became aware of my body in new ways around him, not as an object to be admired, but as a living expression of my emotions. When he looked at me, I felt whole, not dissected. His touch, when it finally came, was careful and reverent, as if he understood that intimacy is a language learned slowly. In those moments, my confidence softened into trust. Yet love, especially love that bridges different worlds, is never without friction. I worried about being overshadowed by his wealth, about losing myself in the brilliance of his life. He worried about being loved for the wrong reasons, about the loneliness that often accompanies power. We spoke these fears aloud, choosing honesty over pride. Each confession drew us closer, binding us with strengths stronger than attraction. There were nights when we stood on his balcony, the city sprawling beneath us, and I felt the vastness of what we were building. He would tell me stories of his childhood, of expectations placed upon him before he could understand them. I shared my own struggles, the battles fought quietly to claim my place in the world. In those exchanges, passion took on a deeper hue. It became partnership. When we finally allowed ourselves to name what was growing between us, it felt less like a declaration and more like an acceptance. Love had been present all along, patient and persistent. Our kisses carried the accumulated weight of restraint, tender and intense all at once. I realized then that passion is not only fire, it is also endurance. The public eye eventually noticed us, as it always does when wealth and beauty intersect. There were whispers, judgments, assumptions. I learned to stand firm, to let our truth be enough. He supported me not with grand gestures, but with consistency, with the daily choice to show up, to listen, to respect my autonomy. Through him, I did not become smaller or quieter. I expanded. I dared to dream bigger, to imagine a future where love did not require sacrifice of self. Together, we navigated boardrooms and kitchens, formal events and lazy mornings, finding balance in contrast. If this were a fairy tale, it might end with certainty, with promises etched in stone. Real life is more fluid. What I know, what I carry with me, is the knowledge that passionate love can be both grounding and transformative. It can honor who you are while inviting you to grow. When I think of him now, I do not first see his wealth or status. I see the man who met my gaze across a crowded room and chose to know me. I see the partner who understood that my beauty was not just in my form, but in my fire, my will, my capacity to love deeply. This is my truth, that from my perspective, love was not something I was swept into, but something I stepped toward, eyes open and heart engaged. And in that choice, I found not only passion, but myself. If the first part of our love was discovery, the second was surrender. After admitting what lived between us, nothing could return to the way it was before. Desire no longer hovered politely at the edges of our conversations. It moved freely, confidently, like a truth finally allowed to breathe. I felt it in the way his hand lingered at my lower back, in the way his voice softened when he said my name, as if it were something precious and fragile. The first night I stayed at his place, the city outside seemed to hold its breath. The apartment was quiet, intimate despite its size, filled with warm light and the subtle scent of cedar and citrus. I remember standing by the window, feeling suddenly exposed, not because of my body, but because of what I was about to give. Passion had always come easily to me, vulnerability had not. He approached me slowly, giving me space even as he closed the distance between us. When his fingers brushed my arm, it sent a tremor through me. Not a shock, but a deep, resonant pull. I turned to face him, and in his eyes I saw desire braided with care. That combination undid me. Our kiss was unhurried, exploratory. It felt less like ignition and more like recognition, as if our bodies had been speaking a language long before our mouths caught up. When he touched me, he did so with intention, tracing the lines of my figure not as a conquest, but as a celebration. I was acutely aware of myself, of my curves, my breath, the way I leaned into him without hesitation. In his arms, I did not feel owned or overwhelmed. I felt chosen. Later, wrapped in quiet, we talked the way people do when walls have already fallen. He confessed how rare it was for him to feel at ease, how often people expected him to lead, to provide, to dominate every space. With me, he said, he felt allowed to simply exist. I told him how his presence made me feel seen beyond my appearance. how that safety awakened a softness I rarely showed. Days turned into weeks, and our connection deepened into something richly physical and profoundly emotional. Passion colored everything: how we argued, how we laughed, how we made up. There was fire between us, yes, but also rhythm. We learned each other's moods, the subtle shifts that signaled desire or distance. I learned that his strength was not just in his power, but in his restraint. He learned that my confidence did not mean I did not need reassurance. Still, reality pressed in. His world was relentless: meetings, expectations, decisions that carried the weight of other people's lives. Mine was demanding in quieter ways, requiring emotional labor and constant self-definition. There were moments when our schedules clashed, when exhaustion sharpened our words. Once, after a particularly tense evening, I accused him of hiding behind his responsibilities. He accused me of not trusting his commitment. The silence that followed was heavy. It was I who broke it. From my place, from my perspective, love had never meant perfection. It meant courage. I told him I was afraid of disappearing into his life, afraid of being an accessory instead of a partner. My voice shook, but I did not stop. He listened, truly listened. Then he did something unexpected. He stepped closer and placed my hand over his heart. I felt its steady insistence beneath my palm. "I'm afraid too," he said quietly. "Afraid of losing you because I don't know how to slow down." That moment changed us. We began to build rituals that belonged only to us. Sunday mornings with no phones, late night drives with no destination, dinners cooked together where status meant nothing and laughter meant everything. In those ordinary moments, passion softened into intimacy, and intimacy reignited passion. I noticed how my body responded differently now, not just to his touch, but to his absence. I missed him physically, yes, but I missed the way he made space for me to be fully myself. Desire, I realized, was